Hey, Alex.
Are you all right?
I'm well, thank you. And you, sir?
Very well, thank you.
We've got a few people already with us. We'll wait for Dave and Ant to turn up. I made it that anyone can kind of join in, save me having to admit people. But everyone's microphone is turned off. Videos are on, and
I don't think
see
mine
Mark
is.
there. Oh, Mark's yours isn't on. I'm gonna mute you. Sorry, Mark. But there we go. That's the first blip. How you getting on, Alex? You well?
Yeah, I'm well. I've been, just staying at home and staying with my wife and my child. And we went shopping today at Sainsbury's, and it's a bit stressful going shopping these days, I can tell you.
Yeah.
But other than that, I've been working from home and playing VRC and working as much on my RC stuff as I possibly can. I mean, it's not that much. I mean, you can only maintain the car as much as it's possible to maintain it, So
Only so many times you can rebuild it, right?
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. How are you finding VRC? You enjoying that?
So I do enjoy it quite a lot. I mean, it's pretty addictive as a game. It's easy to get stuck and just trying to improve your lap times and your driving, and you can just get stuck for hours playing it. And I think if you consider it a game instead of an actual simulator, then you're gonna get a lot of fun out of it.
Yeah. So Ant's now joined us. Welcome, Ant.
Hello. All right.
He's got headset on and everything. Look at him.
Wow.
Professional.
Because I've disabled the microphone on my laptop, so I can't be spied on.
My father-in-law, my father-in-law tapes up the camera.
So do I. That's why you've got all these streaks. It's from the glue from the gaffer tape that's been on the camera.
Fantastic.
I'm not
Fantastic.
paranoid.
Is this live right now?
Yeah, so we're live right now. So
everybody can hear us.
Yeah, everybody can hear us.
Okay.
Some people are turning their cameras on. Some people are not. I mean, those of you who are new to Zoom, you can. I mean, maybe when we get a few more people on there, but you can adjust whether you have it in the gallery view, so you can see everyone in the feed, or you can isolate it to singular. Whoever's talking, that will flash up onto the camera. So that's why I've gone with just having just everybody's microphone off, because obviously then it would jump to them if people's microphones are on. So what we're going to try and do here is we're going to try and get people to create questions as we go on. Ant and I are going to note the questions down on the right hand side down in the chat room, and then we can hit them to yourself and David. Hopefully David will join us some point soon, and then we'll
so I got the chat window on my right side here.
So on the right hand side there, so at the moment it's got from Alex, George Pilkington said hello, and anybody who wants to ask a question, fire it up on the right hand side, and we will get to it. And what it'd be nice to do, if anyone's got a car in front of them, for us to sort of cut over to you and maybe deal with the situation in hand. David will be along soon. He's just dyeing his hair. Good to know, James. Thanks for that insight.
Spider black.
Well, let me tell you, we've done some testing. David hasn't got the best coverage at home, and he's had to go and find some other internet elsewhere.
Really?
Of course, so it's not been the easiest thing for him, but coverage for internet seems to be still sketchy across the country, doesn't it? Which is quite amazing, really, that it's like that. But there we go. So and what have you been up to? Been VRC?
I did a bit of VRC, a bit of other online gaming after work. I've been working hard. It's annoying, all these people that have been allowed to have the time off.
Yeah. Well, so this is the first time I've ever had a paid holiday. Being self-employed, it's quite surreal, really. But would rather be working, that's for sure. What's that, Mark? What are you showing there? Hang on. What are you showing us there, Mark?
Well, it's old.
How old?
Is it made of Lexan?
It's made of Lexan. It's before Alex wasn't born when I was driving this. There's no chance. And
I can see that it's a 12 scale.
It's 12 scale, yeah. And at the time, this was the speedo I used.
Is that mechanical?
Yeah, it's mechanical. A servo would go in there.
So how do you set the drag brake on that thing?
There was no such thing because at the time the motors had, but you had drag brake, and I was the first to create. I built this. I don't know whether you can see it actually, but it's a little dual wishbone suspension, which
Wow.
I was a kid and I fabricated this out of. It's made out of 2 triangles of titanium. And bolted to some ball joints that I got from the model shop, and that was the first attempt at an independent kind of front suspension. I don't know if you can see it.
I can see it very well.
Yeah. So
Pretty good engineering work there.
yeah, I took this to a national at Exeter, and I didn't win anything there, but I did win a set of cells for making that suspension. It was shit.
What brand of car is that?
Well, I think it's a Schumacher. I think it's a Schumacher. They made a Lexan car. I think it came after the C car, but I can't actually remember. But at some point, it's got Mark Payne and £15. I was obviously trying to flog it. Nothing changes, does it, Stu? You buy something, you run it, and then you try and sell it.
Standard process.
Yeah.
I've not heard anything from David as yet. I expect he's still trying to set himself up. But that's good, Mark. Appreciate that. That
Bit of show and tell.
So maybe we'll get cracking, Alex. And when David turns up, I'm just looking for him here. David is here. Fantastic. Hello. Welcome to the party, David.
How are we doing?
Very well, thank you. Very well. So we've got enough room in the chat room for 100 of us. Now, if you go up to the top right-hand side of your screen, for those of you who haven't used Zoom before, in the top right-hand corner of the screen, you've got 2 options. You've got it where you can isolate it as a sort of a main picture in the middle of your screen, or you can click it and you get the full gallery view. And of course, if you use the gallery view, you're not going to get as big a detail of what you're going to see from David and Alex. So I would recommend sticking it on the individual one. But anyway, all different. Down the right-hand side, we've got the chat room. So feel free to ask your questions. And as we go, and if you want to make a note, as I will, of the questions that come our way. And of course, thanks for everyone joining us as well. This is those of you that maybe listened to episode 4 of the podcast. Ant and I talked about potential training days and getting better, which sort of set my brain in motion to maybe see if we could do something remotely. And it was obviously on the back of Spashett Speed Secrets in the podcast. And Alex very kindly said that he'd come along and join us. So much appreciated, Alex, for you taking some time out and helping us guys out.
Thank you, Stu, for inviting me.
A pleasure. So I think a good question or a good place to start would be to both of you. Maybe David, you kick us off as it's your segment, shall we say? What would you say is the top of the tree that you see most RC racers neglecting in their preparation, shall we say, to all of their cars. Most notably, we'll go with 12 scale and GT12. But yeah, what would be the number one thing that they neglect?
Probably, truthfully, tyres. I mean, tyres are the key to all types of motorsport.
Well, there he is. Look.
And I'm forever watching people at a racetrack trimming tyres and sorting tyres out and that type of stuff. And to me, that just, you're in round 2 on a Saturday, or you're halfway through practice of an event and you're trimming tyres. And to me, that just seems a little bit funny. You should really go prepared and have that type of stuff ready before you go.
And what about yourself, Alex? What do you see as a common trait or misgiving of racers?
I would say, other than tires, I think body shells are often forgotten about. Like, people would invest a lot in their cars and have everything up to par and all the latest electronics and stuff, and then they would run with a old broken body shell which isn't aerodynamically efficient anymore. And it's easy to forget that the body shell, which isn't in perfect condition, is gonna hurt the handling a lot.
Yeah. So on that point, and I think it's something that I certainly have battled with, is when you get a shell sprayed up, and this is a question that's come in from Stu Barber about how do you go cutting and preparing that body shell when it's sprayed. Is there a process that you could show us, either of you guys, to cut the shell from clean, if you like, with no holes in it, no arches in it? What would be your go-to process? Let's start with you, David. What would be your process?
For me, I trim the base of the body shell, so nearly to the cut line, but not all the way to the cut line, in case you want to adjust it a little when it's on the car. And if it's painted, of course, you can't see the body posts on the inside, so I tend to use these little magnetic markers. You put them on top of the body post, then you have a magnet on the top of the body, so you can put a little pen mark and actually mark off where the post will go. If it's a body shell I've used before,
David's checked out. He's had enough of body shells. Are you still there, David? Over to you, Alex.
Yeah, something which I always pay extra attention to when I mount the body shell is the distance forward, basically how far forward the body is mounted. So what I'm talking about is basically how much material you leave at the front of the wheel in this area here. So how far do you push the body forward on the chassis? And this has a big effect on the handling, and it's something which we play with a lot in touring car. And I don't see people doing it as much in Trosco, but it's really something that you should pay attention to. So when I mount the body shell, what I do is, I'm going to show you like this. What I do is I measure the distance from the hole to a certain reference point. For example, here at the front lip, there's a little ridge here on the AMR, which you can use as a reference, and you measure the distance here. So you can move this point plus 1, 2, or 3 millimeters back and forth, and you can adjust the balance of the car that way, the way you mount the body shell. So moving the body backwards and forward has a huge influence on the handling. You should really pay attention to that.
And would you? Okay, so David's back now. Alex is just carrying on this just for the second. David, we'll come back to you in a second. So on that, Alex, where would you use those reference points to start cutting holes? Obviously, with no wheel arches and no hole points. Is that how you would begin the process?
Yeah, exactly. So if I have a clear body shell, I try to start with those points. So in this case, from the center of the hole to that ridge in the front lip. But you also need to make sure that the body is centered on the car. But that's a bit trickier to do because, for example, the AMR isn't really straight in itself. It comes off a mold which is handmade, and the body isn't really straight. So you need to either use a template from an old body shell, or you need to try to center it and eyeball it and measure distance from left to right, and it's hard to do. But once you have a template, then you're all set for mounting the next few body shells.
And with and we'll count over to Dave in a second. And Mark Payne asked, do you move it forwards or backwards generally with your mount position as a start point, shall we say?
So my starting point is always plus 3 or 4 millimeters from center. So always quite far forward actually, and that's how I like to set up my car, to have more initial steering, and I always mount the body a bit forward. But it's really individual. It comes down to each driver's specific setup, and some other brands, they prefer a more neutrally mounted body shell and so on. But on the X-Ray, it just works better when you mount it further forward.
So, David, Alex spoke of where he puts the body shell in terms of forwards and backwards, and a reference point on the front hulls. You were saying about the magnets that you use on your body shells.
Yeah, you just obviously magnet marker on the body shell, and then you just pinhole it with a Sharpie pen, and you can line up the wheel arches where they're going to be. So when you cut the holes, it drops on. But I agree with Alex. I also move the body forwards. So when you look at the body shell, if I take one, if you can see this on the camera, but you can see the wheel arch mold line there, and you can see that I've cut it back. So I've moved the body shell forwards. And then much like Alex, when I'm really happy with the body shell or I like the way it feels, I know this is I cut it. So I cut the complete sides off. It's a base template. So then in the future, when you want to do exactly the same body shell, you can just rest it on the top and you've got a perfect layout straight away. And you can cut a body shell really, really quickly by doing that. So when you get a good body, don't just throw it away. If you like the handling of it, use it to copy it. Use it to copy and make your next one.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I've always tried to do that, but maybe I haven't quite gone as far as cutting the whole thing out and putting it as a plate like you have right there. I've kind of cut little bits out and jammed it up, but never really felt like it was the same profile. Oh, that's interesting stuff. So getting more underneath the car, Darren Ford, and this may seem simple or silly questions to the seasoned racer, but I think it's important for us to really cover everyone. He says, do I need to set the toe of my car? Yes.
Is the simple answer.
Why?
Always start with the front tyres parallel, so dead straight. That's what I'd recommend, because you can adjust the way the car handles by adding toe out or toe in. So start neutral, start with them dead straight.
And what's having one wheel different to the other, what's that going to do?
Really, you won't have, when you try and trim your car, of course, you're going to have both of them equally wrong to go in a straight line. So if you have toe in, for example, it'll be more stable. If you have a bit of toe out, it's going to react a little bit faster. But I do strongly recommend just start, if you're a beginner, just make them parallel to each other.
And you can do that with a ruler, can't you? Measure the fronts of the wheels and the rear of the wheels on the front to measure the gap out.
Yep.
Alex, Darren also asks about the steering angles. So the actual full turn of the outside wheel and the inside wheel. Does it matter if he doesn't know this?
Yeah, you should actually set your steering lock to be the same left and right on a setup station, ideally. I mean, then you can fine tune it on the track. You can do circles on the track, but I always set my steering lock using the setup station, the hoodie gauge, and I set it to turn all the way to one side, and you can see how many degrees of lock you actually have. And yeah, you should check this regularly, and then you should as well do circles on the track to double check the how big of a turn the car needs to turn.
And what about steering angles as well? I mean, something from going over to the States and looking at their setup sheets more than our UK setup sheets. The guys in the US always tend to put a reference on the actual inside wheel. If I got that right? Yeah, the inside wheel of how many degrees. You never see that in the UK, but it's certainly something that you see more in the US. How relevant is that?
It's really critical because that determines your Ackerman, how much the inside wheel is turning in relation to the outside wheel. And we know that Ackerman is really important for the setup of the car, so we should pay attention to that. And we don't always need a number for it, but we should know what more or less Ackerman does.
And as you're there, what does more or less Ackerman do?
So I always feel that, at least in 12 scale, less Ackerman always harder to drive, but it turns more. And it scrubs the front tires more. It's going to have more front tire wear, but yeah, it will turn more.
Do you feel the same, David?
Yeah. I mean, paying attention to what you're doing again when you get a good car and you like it, going home that evening and making a measurement of what steering lock you were using, inside and outside, just holds you in good stead when you build another car. You may put the same servo in it, but you may space it different. Or if you want to change it a little bit from where you're at, you know where you can go back to. So it is something that we all do pay attention to.
And the general front end of a car, how do you place that in its importance relative to the back of the car?
It's all important. There's only weak links in a race car. If you've got one item that's not functioning or not working as well as it can do, you make other compromises around the rest of the chassis. So ideally, balance, which we will talk about as racers, the front end has to balance the rear end at all times. And then it's how you as a driver, how you like that balance to be.
And in relation to the front of the car, I mean, there was a point at Poole 2 years ago where I was sitting opposite you and I had a lap full of shims, and it was really my baptism of fire of learning about that process of tweak, compressed front springs, making the front end work and move. I don't want to draw anyone out here, but I was certainly that guy that had no clue how to really maintain a car, a 12 scale car. And I think even good drivers, and I'll say his name because he's on. It's Jody Sherratt. He's still learning. He's a great driver, but clearly he drives around. From when I've had a little go with his car, he drives around problems, i.e. a bit of tweak, a bit of this and a bit of that. It's easily done, and I think we don't ever really find out how to get through those spells of how do I make my car feel the same every time I stick it down. And I think that's really, how important getting the front end is. It almost, to me, feels like it's everything on a 12 scale car. It's obviously not, but it feels like it's a massive part. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, of course it is. Tells the car where it's going. So yeah, of course it's really, really important. But again, that's prep work. That's work you do at home before you go to the racetrack. That's making sure bulkheads are straight. That's making sure axles are the same height, left and right. That's making sure that you have, if you're running front end droop, it's the same left and right before you start. Because then, as you rightly say, as you go through the day's racing, if it changes or it looks different to how you built it at home, then you have to make adjustments as you go through the day. Either put a new spring on it or add a shim. But just, you need to know where you start from so you can understand what is changing as you go racing. But yeah, of course, the front end setup is critical, and it can change the whole feeling of the car.
You've got a 12 scale car there, David?
Yeah, I've got a couple. So,
just referring to, would you be able to take the front wheel off or one of the front wheels off, and just when I was talking about shimgate, just sort of showing people what I was referring to, because I think perfect.
Okay.
Here's one I had earlier.
Here's one we made earlier and prepared earlier. So yeah, so this is obviously left side. Spring still dirty from last time I used it, but of course, on the way I like to use the springs on the front of my 12 scale car is they're not loaded. So when it sits there, the spring's not under tension, but there's no gap there. As soon as I touch it, the springs becomes active. So when you actually weight the car, so when you actually put this down with the weight of the chassis, there will be a certain amount of spring droop. The front end will sag slightly into that spring. And the more sag you have, so the more up travel, the more droop you have, the more front end grip you get. So it's a compromise. So it's not a compromise. It's a stiff spring, soft spring, more tension, less tension. You can tune the car just by adjusting shims and spacing.
And the shims below the spring, do they do something different compared to the springs on top of the hub and on top of the arm?
So if you're talking about shims below the spring here and then shims on top here, it makes no difference. All you're doing there is you're just spacing the spring. Moving the axle, so putting, like I have on here, shims underneath the block or above the block, so you can increase camber change or reduce camber change. That, of course, makes a difference to handling.
And Alex, how much importance do you pay to your front end over a period of a race event?
Yeah, the front end is everything, just like we spoke about, and that's the beauty of 12 scale as well, that it can really reward you, and it can also frustrate you a lot if you get it right or wrong. So yeah, I spent all day working on the front end, shimming up and down, checking the camber 20 times, and just to make sure that it's perfect. And even though it's not perfect every time, I try to get as close as it can be. And yeah, that's part of why we love this class, that it's unforgiving, but it's also very rewarding.
Your process of a day, and I think this is something that I found from start to finish of a race weekend, how much I would maybe either change my droop, change my springs, change my caster. How much of that are you doing during an event? Let's say you got there on you've had let's say a national 2 days. Not that you've probably done that many 2-day events or the nationals, but there's no real point in us talking about a Thursday practice Friday, because it's not really the same as what we would experience in the UK maybe. But if you're there for 2 days, how long would it take you to settle to a right point with the car's springs, caster, camber, before you'd go, right, I'm in a good place there?
So it's really different from running a BRCA national compared to running a big event, say a Euros or a Worlds. So you have way more practice at those races. So you have way more chances to test different things on your setup. At a national, you show up, you have one run to sort of clean the track, and then you start qualifying. There's only one round to count for the qualifying, so you can actually test stuff a little bit through qualifying, but the track is also gradually getting faster throughout the day. So you really have very limited chances to actually improve your setup at a national, is what I feel. And if you arrive and you're not prepared, you find yourself struggling, and then it's really hard to recover. But ideally, you would show up, the car will be balanced from the start, and then you can just fine-tune the setup as you go on through qualifying.
And I think you've got a question.
With so with that kind of going somewhere with a setup that you think might work, you think that the car will be balanced. What would you be looking at with tyre choice? So, would you go with two sets of compounds or 4 sets of compounds and try and work your way through the day to decide which is going to be fastest?
No, if I'm familiar with the type of carpet and the track, if I've been on this type of carpet or track before, then I can usually narrow it down to a single type of tire or 2 types at most, and that's it. Hopefully, I don't need to try anything more than 1 or 2 different compounds.
Same with you, David?
Exactly the same. Exactly the same. If you take too many choices with you on a race weekend, when the track time is limited, you're just going to get yourself in more trouble.
So sticking with tyres, how about tyre sizes? Have you got a range in mind before the event, and then how do you manage that?
For me, I try and true everything at home before I leave. So I've got less to do on the weekend. Makes ride height and setting the car up a little bit easier as you go through the day if they're all the same size. Then obviously rerunning them. If you're rerunning the same 5 sets, of course the ride height stays generally the same. So I do try and, again, as Alex said, if you know the carpet you're going to, so if you know the club and you've been there before and you know that track feels edgier than another track or it's got more grip, then you can adjust your tyre sizes very slightly before you get there.
How about you, Alex? Stick with the same size, or?
Yeah, ideally I try to true all the tires to the same size, and hopefully I can stick with that size throughout the day, and that's gonna save me time when setting up the car, so I don't have to change the ride height. And hopefully that's what's gonna happen. I mean, there's occasions where you will have to change the size because the car is just not working or something like that. But ideally, I would true the tires to the same size and just run the same size the whole day.
Cool. So on that edginess topic, then, David, quite often we get to tracks and people say that their car is super edgy over the first couple of minutes. Any advice on how to deal with that? Is it a prep issue, a driving issue?
Can be an additive prep issue. If the car's a little edgy, you can round the front edge of your tyre and the rear edge of your tyre a little bit more, so the tyre kind of gives grip in a more even manner. And generally, it's because you didn't prepare your rear tyre properly. You didn't dry it enough before the start of the run. I call it bleeding. If you soak a tyre for too long in too much additive in free air, you can't dry it. It takes so long to dry, and you have to really squeeze the foam to get it all out. I think that's why some of the guys use the vacuum pumps. But yeah, if it's edgy, generally you didn't dry your rear tyre well enough.
Alex, you like to use the pump?
Yeah, I've been using the pump for a few years. At most races, I try to use the pump. Is a trick that I picked up from the Japanese crowd. All the Japanese guys were always doing it, so I figured I would try it, and actually it works really good. Yeah, so that's a trick you can use. But when it comes to edginess, normally it's about fine tuning again. It just takes a small change to take the edginess out, such as a tiny bit less front additive or a tick less camber, and that can transform the car from being too edgy to being just balanced.
Excellent. So got a few questions coming in. Got one from James Stewart. So James, fire away. Good evening, by the way.
No, good evening, Stu. Yeah, okay. Just interesting one then. On the centre shock, do you play much, or do you run any rebound, and do you play much at all with the rebound to tune the handling of the car?
Thanks, James. Over to you. Yeah, go, Dave. Yeah, sure.
Me personally, no. And the reason I don't is because it can change during the day. So unless you're prepared to rebuild the shock every single run, I personally don't. I tried to build a shock with no rebound. It's very, very difficult to do that. So it doesn't have rebound, it doesn't pull back in as well. So, but I personally try not to, so it stays consistent over the whole weekend.
Okay, so build it, yeah. Vented cap, no suck back.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Fair enough.
How about yourself, Alex? Yeah.
Yeah, I completely agree with David. I try not to play with rebound for the reason that it's hard to make it the same every time. And we have the same thing in touring car, actually. Some people would tune the handling with rebound, but the problem is then you would have to rebuild the shocks all the time to make it the same for each run. And in 12 scale, usually I feel the easiest way to build a shock is to build it with a little bit of rebound or 50% of rebound, and that's usually how it stays for at least a race day meeting.
Good stuff. Thanks, James. Appreciate that.
Okay.
So we've got another question here from Lewis Marco. He says, "What is your process for learning a new track?" David. let's go to you.
Generally, take it easy for a while. I mean, you're not going to win the event on lap 1. You're not going to win the event on lap 10. So
is that all you got for us? You haven't got any gold nuggets?
Let's do 2 or 3 minutes without smashing the car to bits. That would be my advice. And just get your eye of depth perception of the corners. I mean, that to me is the best thing you can do. You see so many people go out there full throttle, lap 1, smash, bang, wallop, and the car's all bent and twisted and they learn nothing. There's no point to it. So just get your eye in and just try and understand where is an acceptable risk to take and where is an unacceptable risk to take on the track. And also, when you go up on the driver's stand, you know as a driver what you like to see. So if you like to see the end of the main straight, you like to be closer, then stand down that end. Or if you like to be further away because you like to have longer to see the corner, then again, just be careful where you pick on the driver's stand because that can make a difference sometimes too.
What about yourself, Alex?
I usually try to go up there during the first round of practice and watch cars go around the track. And ideally, I'd like to watch someone who's driving the same type of car as me and see how their car is working and do they have any strengths or weaknesses already? Can you see if they're struggling in certain corners? Are they hitting anything, which might be a warning sign that that's something you need to look out for? And yeah, those sort of things. Like I try to watch the earlier heats and see where those guys are struggling, and I try to keep that in mind for when I'm going up there.
And on standing on the rostrum, what are your personal views on what you look for in your view of the track? Is there any? Do you find the toughest part of the track and get a good perspective on that and work from there, or do you have another system, Alex?
Honestly, not so much. I try to stand on the side of the rostrum where it's easier to drive through a chicane. So if the track has a really difficult chicane, I try to be in the spot where it's easier to see the car going through that chicane, because that's usually where you can win or lose a lot of time, I feel.
And what about yourself, David?
I look at the track and I look at the corners nearest the driver's stand. So if there's a section where you come fast right in front of you under your feet and then have to turn, I try and stand away from that section. So I get to look down on that section or see the car coming into that section at the fastest point nearest to me. So I look at that and try and stand away from that. If that isn't there, then I try and stand probably to the left-hand side of the middle so I can see because normally we go clockwise, so I can see the end of the main straight for longer. And that's just what I prefer to do.
And when you're going through the day, how conscious are you of adapting your driving style? Are you starting to notice areas in the track that feel like they've got more grip or less grip, or it's not materialized, or the track's not developed in the same way? Have you got any perception on that, or are you kind of saying, oh, the track is the same, i.e. it's gone up or down in grip? David?
Generally, that's kind of a bit of a communication with your teammates, really, when you go back to the pits. There have been meetings where you come off and think, car feels really good, but around that left-hander over there, it feels really weird, or it's doing some funky stuff. And you just ask the guy next to you, does your car do something funky round? And they go, yeah. So you know it's not your car. You know the track is either not evolved or there's something going on that corner. And generally with the UK, when we put down new tracks every week, if you actually go and have a look at it, that corner could well have been going the other way last week and the pile of carpet just hasn't pushed over yet. So therefore it's behaving oddly. So I do pay attention to it, but then as Alex said, I do then watch other cars or talk to other people to see if they're having the same issue at the same place.
What about yourself, Alex?
So we all know that 12 scales are sensitive to bumps. So I always try to look out for bumps or spots where the car can get unsettled from bumps in the carpet. And it depends on the track, of course, but depending on where those bumps are, it will affect how you will approach certain corners. And yeah, that's one thing to keep in mind.
Oh, we've got a question on the chat from Jason Cartwright. He says, if the track evolves and has a lot more grip near the end of the meeting, do you change how long additive is on the tyres and or change the compound to a harder tyre?
Yes and yes. If I can, if the grip gets that high and I have smaller tires available, then I will try smaller tires. If the grip is that high and we're not running out of traction before the end of the 8 minutes, I'm not going to bog the car by using too much additive. So again, yes, I will reduce the additive time.
How about you, Alex?
Yeah, so this is mainly important for race events which run over several days. So you have practice for a couple of days, then you have qualifying and finals. So then the grip levels will change quite a lot, and then I would adjust the tire size most likely between practice, qualifying, and even for the finals, usually going smaller.
Chris Wilkinson says, are tire sizes as critical with GT12 as they are with LMP?
No, not so much. And the reason not so much, the car is so heavy.
So the impact is less, obviously.
Yeah.
So with tire size, what's changing?
In what
Alex?
regard?
David, yeah. So in any regard, really. I mean, I hope I know the answer to this, but I'm asking, because I think, I remember back in the day when I think it was G and I were at Maritime, and we pulled some JFTs out the packet. God, got loads of life in those. And go round, hit one bend, and they were chunked, and then sort of throw them over the corner over your shoulder. And then we saw, I think it was Steve Moore, doing his tyre truing. Oh, they got a true over there. That looks all right, didn't it? And then we got into tyre truing. But of course, and there was someone, I can't remember the name of the chap, that he got himself a new tyre true for GT12. He said, "This is a great tool." I said, "You'll learn to hate that tool, in the years to come." But of course, someone that, well, I know I need to make my tyres smaller because it, aids performance. It's going to make hopefully the tyres last a bit longer, not chunk, etc. But when you start talking to someone that is new to the hobby, and you say, what you want to do is you want to go 41.5 and 42.5, yep, or 40.5. They go, well, I know what I was like when I did 40.5. That'll do. 40.8. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, that and off. So what is the detail in the tire size or what are the details in the tire size that impact the car?
So when you go too big, the issue you have is the shoulder of the tire just folds around underneath the car, so the car doesn't really work. So it's kind of a false economy. As you said, you chunked them probably because the sidewalls were just flexing all the time and the rubber just tore itself off the wheel. So it's the tire's not really working properly. But truing them to 41.5 front and 42.5 rear for club racing is absolutely fine. For nationals, 41, 42 for me to start on a Saturday is normal. When the grip comes up and you want to reduce the rolling resistance on the rear and you put a smaller tire on, you can gain corner speed from putting the smaller tire on. You can also gain a feeling of more steering and rotation in the car when you narrow the stagger between the front and rear tire. The other thing you have to be careful of when you start narrowing the stagger of the tire is the rear wear rate. Because if you reduce the rear tire too much, getting too close to the front, and your rear tire wear then escalates, you can lose grip before the end of the run. So you have to consider all those things before you cut your tires.
Anything to add on that, Alex?
Yeah, I mean it's fairly simple. More side bite from a bigger tire, but also more traction roll issues and such when the grip comes up. But something I do pay attention to is the front tire wear, especially in modified and open classes. You'll have a lot of front tire wear because you'll always be scrubbing the wheels more than you would in the stock classes. So the front tire wear in modified is pretty critical. You don't want to have too small of a front tire because you'll end up having understeering at the end of the run. So I always pay more attention to the front tire size than the rear usually.
That's a question. but that's a perfect example of knowing your car. That's how his car drives. Other cars may wear the rear tyre more. So again, it's learning what your chassis does and how your chassis behaves.
Yeah, and of course the way the cars drive now with the spool, all of a sudden you're putting more into the front tyre, aren't you? I mean, there's obviously you're driving it harder. Are there any outside of the tyre running with a spool? Is there any changes that you've felt that you've needed to move towards, David?
For me, running the spool, I've had to choose a smaller tyre at nationals when the grip comes up earlier with a solid rear axle. Whereas with a diff, I've been able to go longer into Saturday with a slightly bigger tyre. Now with a solid axle, I've had to go smaller quicker.
And how about you, Alex? What changes have you made?
Yeah, exactly the same. Since we went to spools, I felt the need for a smaller tire, both front and rear, on the X-Ray car, and that's been the trend for pretty much every track I've been to over the last season. And yeah, that's definitely a spool thing.
How much is the spool? Obviously, someone that's racing professionally, Alex, full time. How much has the spool impacted your driving style? Have you had to adapt it in any way?
Yeah, I definitely feel that it's been hard to adapt, especially the first season when we ran it. We've all gotten used to it, but I don't like how the car drives with a spool. It's something that you would have to get used to, and it just is really edgy to drive. It drives kind of square, but once you get a hang of it, it isn't too bad. But when you start off, if you're used to driving with a diff, it's really tricky.
What about yourself, David? Are you a lover of the spool?
I hate it. I hate what it makes you do on race day. I hate the way it makes you have to go racing. It is more difficult to drive. And the other thing I noticed with a solid axle as well, when you're working on your car during a race, if you try and just back off a little bit, you crash because you get out of rhythm and the car does something funny. So you end up being restricted by the spool, and it can just make life really, really difficult. But when it's right, I have to say, unfortunately for all of us, it's faster.
And Mark Payne. Oh, sorry, Ant. Go on. Shoot.
Yeah, well, I was going to say So I actually like the way the car drives with a spool. It fixes the problems that I felt I had with the diff car, and it actually feels easier for me. So it's obviously just you guys being good and have got used to driving a certain way, and then I wasn't very good, and the car sort of came to me. But what I wanted to ask about was, do you think that the spool is right for everyone to use, knowing that it's faster overall, or do you think that there's a certain style of person or a certain ability level where you wouldn't recommend people switch to the spool?
I honestly think that the gain of a spool maybe for the top 10-15% of people that race 12 scale in the world. Other than that, between a diff and a spool, you're going to go just as quick with a diff, just as quick. Because the diff also gives you the option if you can run it tight. You don't have to run it spin free, loose free. You can run it tight, so you have a little bit of give there, so it will help you when you need it to. But definitely for a beginner, when my daughter decides she wants to race 12 scale, she'll be using a diff because it's just easier for her to manage.
Yeah, James Stewart was just saying that how noticeable it was at the Euros. The spool made the cars much harder to race, as opposed to just being faster.
Yeah.
Did you feel that, Alex? Well, I mean, it probably wasn't that way for you because you did quite well at the Euros, didn't you?
Yeah, it worked out, but I have to say that the cars are definitely harder to race with a spool. They're less forgiving. The throttle control is even more important than it is with a diff, so it's definitely unforgiving, and you see people make more silly mistakes with a spool. But what you need to remember is that the spool actually came from racing in the US on the CRC black carpet, and this is the really high grip carpet where the rear was always super locked in. And there, it's actually something you can get away with for club racing and for lower levels of racing, for beginners and so on, where they always have rear grip. But on our grip levels in Europe, especially for clubs in the UK where you have very little grip, I think there's no point to run a spool for club racing. It's simple as that.
Yeah, I think we're all, all sort of romanced into the thought of having something that's going to make us go faster. I mean, that's why we all buy new cells, new motors, new tires, new body shells. I think that it's like going to a sweet shop and not buying sweets, isn't it? I mean, we're racers. We want to go faster, and we want to hit the wall faster. And I think that's the thrill of the chase, isn't it? And I think it's very difficult not to think that I've got another 2 or 3 tenths with just whipping the diff out and sticking the spool in. Where do you think you'll go, and moving forwards as a numpty like me? Are you going to stick with the spool or the diff?
Me?
Yeah.
The spool. It works for me in low grip, high grip. The only time I switch, the 2 times I switched back to a diff was at Eastbourne, when we just couldn't get a hang of the funky grip that we had. Couldn't work it out. And then when I was running mod at Limburg, in stock, it was amazing. It was like you didn't have to lift and it just went round. With mod, it was just too difficult for me. It would just snap oversteer it if you were slightly off the line. So I went back to a diff there. But in general, I'll start with a spool.
Yeah. I mean, Mark. I think Mark Payne makes a really relevant point on the chat. He says, "Do we think there are any rule changes that would protect or improve the drivability of our cars?" I mean, we are getting to a point where, if there are guys that feel that a spool makes the car drive really difficult, and you've got this sort of separation of guys, half the field are getting on with it, the other half are not getting on with it. I mean, I take a classic example is someone like Scott Morton, who's a super driver, absolutely hates the spool and has really kind of gone backwards. And you kind of think, well, just get on with it, Scott, and get better at it. But actually what you're going to end up doing is actually potentially having the chance of making people walk away from it and do other stuff. So there has to be that kind of balancing act of all of us still trying to go as fast as we can, but also not making it so that we end up breaking 3 chassis in a meeting. So do you think there does need to be a conscious decision to discuss moving away from the spool? Either of you?
Difficult thing to police, though, isn't it? It's a difficult thing to tech. As I said, you can run a diff nearly locked. So we put diffs in and we lock them. What are you going to do? You're going to go through tech and have a diff meter there, making sure you have a diff action that is suitable, that no one's going to tighten up with a nut driver before you put your car on the track. It's something which unfortunately is here, and it's probably here to stay. It's for the racer's individual choice. It's for them to enjoy their day's racing. If they want to run it, let them run it. Yeah. If Scott Morton prefers to run a diff and he has a great weekend's racing and he enjoys himself and he feels like he's getting cleaner, better runs for it, then good on him.
What about you, Alex? You think it would be better policed out or left?
Yeah, I don't think it's possible to police it properly, as David said. But what I do think is possible is to improve the current cars and redesign the cars in a way where they're more forgiving to drive with a spool, and where they're easier to drive with a spool, also for club racing. And you can see that clearly with a Schumacher car. It was a car that was basically designed around the spool, at least that was my impression, and you could see that they could benefit from the spool on lower levels of grip earlier than the other brands could. And yeah, that's something we have to work on for the future, is to make the cars more forgiving to drive with a spool.
Yeah, because that's certainly something that's happened is now over the last 18 months, that we've all shifted across to the spool and the profile of the cars has stayed the same. And then all of a sudden you've got Schumacher, now you've got Automatics coming out with something very different. and how they deal with the Spool will probably be different to how they are at the moment. Do you see it that way, Dave?
Where you had the luxury of the diff absorbing some of the pressures within the chassis, unfortunately now you don't have that luxury anymore, so that's got to be done by the chassis. So there will be some changes over, I would imagine, if we ever get back racing over the next year or two, where chassis design changes to complement the Spool. And
is there anything else that we can? I mean, it's a question from Mark Stiles, who did ask you, David, how have you managed to keep down a retail business, three daughters, and keep your hair still so black? I mean, it's a question that I ask myself daily. I've gone to shaving mine off because it's gone so grey. But is there a way that we can make the class more enjoyable? I mean, I don't think. I mean, short of taking heroin, Mark, I mean, I don't think I could have more fun on a Saturday and Sunday with my clothes on, really, than racing 12 scale and smashing it up against the wall. So I don't know what else we could do to make it more fun. What do you think?
I mean, for me, I think one thing we do forget from time to time is club racing. A lot of emphasis is put on nationals in the UK, sometimes to the detriment of clubs and local racing. Maybe with the shutdown that we're all living at the moment, maybe the opportunity to fix that will present itself, and we can get back to racing at local clubs and having more fun with our friends locally.
What about you, Alex?
And one good thing which you have been doing, and many others too, is to try to promote the sport online and try to keep people together. Even though we're not physically together, we can meet up online and talk about RC for the future. And yeah, that's something we can do. We cannot meet to race each other at the moment, but we can try to talk about the future and try to learn as much as possible. Other than that, we can try to support our local clubs and our local hobby shops.
Yeah, good point. Well made there. Got a few questions on the chat feed here. Hopefully, Darren Ford heard about his front toe and turning on his car. That's on the start of the chat. So we definitely covered that, because I'm looking at you, Darren. I can see you straight in front there. You sent a couple of questions about the toe and your steering angles. We did cover that. The guys covered that. So when it comes back out live, you'll be able to find out what the guys said on that. Matt Jones said he never uses brake, and this is for GT12. He never uses brake, but has drag brake set on his GT12. What do you think about that? We'll go to Dave, as he's a GT12 guy.
I personally don't use drag brake. I like to modulate that myself. It's a setting that when you start the race, you can't change it. So if you don't like it, and the car's slowing down too much in the corner, you end up putting your finger more on the throttle to not allow drag brake to be initiated. So I prefer to control it myself. And then the max brake setting, in most speedos, you can adjust the feel and the frequency, and I try and figure out and set it so basically when I just pull back full brake, the car doesn't lock itself up. It will just slow down as fast as it can with the grip that it has. There's no point having your brake set that when you pull it, she just locks the rear axle. In my opinion, where it just locks the rear axle, I think that's just going to make you crash. So that's how I try and set my brakes.
And drag brake for you, Alex, you run that with your mod car in 12 scale?
Yes, so I race mainly modified 12 scale, but I use the drag brake and the push brake, both those kind of brakes to help the car to turn. And that's just how my driving style is. And I like to have quite an aggressive drag brake, but I also like to use the push brake in the corner to sort of set up the car for the corner and help to make it turn. And that's something that's individual, of course, but that's how I like to drive and how I like to set up my car.
That's interesting. So you have an aggressive drag brake. What are you classing as aggressive, Alex?
So lately with a Hobby Wing Speedo, I've been using between 5 and 10%. depending on the motor used. So it's a little different depending on if you're using a 6.5 or a 3.5. But in that range normally, so quite high drag brake, I would say.
And you have a related question?
Yeah, I was going to ask about driving style with mod and brakes. How many corners are you braking for? Is it every corner with push brake, or just at the end of the straight, or a combination?
So it can be quite a few corners depending on how the car is handling. So if it's understeering, I would use the brake in almost every corner to try to make it turn, but ideally only a couple times per lap.
Dave?
Don't use brake. No, I don't. when you race stock, you can use the brake to make it turn right on the apex. If you just want to make it pinch in a bit tighter on the apex, of course you can just pull the brake a little bit. But in stock, in my opinion, generally when your car is right, you should have enough handling in stock that you shouldn't need to use brake. In mod, like Alex and Ollie and those guys that race mod, which is silly, stupid fast, then yeah, you got to slow those things down and get them turned. Otherwise, they're just going to be in pieces. So their game's a little bit different to what the majority of us do.
So that's with stock then, David. So I said earlier when we're using the spool that on some tracks lifting is sort of optional and the cars just seem to turn. How on a normal kind of club meet, how much are you lifting off? Are you coasting into a corner? Is it just a slight blip off and then straight back on?
That's something which I will assume most drivers won't be able to tell you. And the reason we can't tell you, it's not we're being difficult, we simply don't know. What we're trying to do is that the radio kind of disappears in front of you and you just put the car in the right place and make it do the right thing. How you're making it do that becomes a natural act of driving. But generally, if I'm learning a track, yes, I'm rolling off the gas, I'm taking it nice and easy, I'm finding out where I can go, where I can't go, where the grip's going to be, I'm learning the track, yes, of course. The ideal in stock is you enter as fast as you possibly can, she carries all the corner speed in the world, and you're back on the gas as hard and as fast as possible. Because in stock, you just don't want to slow down. Whereas Alex and the guys that are racing mod have to think a little bit more about the corner. Okay, she's a tight hairpin. I'm going to go in fully lit. I'm going to brake a yard before. I'm going to let the drag brake take care of that. And then in the middle of the corner when I'm on the lock, I'm just going to pull the brake, turn around and get gone. So their procedure of racing is probably way far and above what we do in stock. And the way they attack it has to be different also. They're probably actually turning the steering for less time than we are because they're going to the corner and point and then to the corner and point. Whereas in stock, we're trying to keep the speed up and keep it going at all times.
Yeah, and Mark asks about the opportunity or the scope to reduce capacity in batteries to make it so you can't feel like you've got an endless supply of energy and therefore have the opportunity of maybe reining in speed, making racing a bit closer. Is that a way to go, do you think, Alex?
Yeah, so we've been debating this for a few years now. I mean, what's the best way to go about with modified? Do we make the cars as fast as possible? Do we have a motor limit? Do we have a speedo limit? What is the answer? I don't know. The turnout in modified has always been fairly low in recent years. I mean, with 6.5, we had a little upswing, I would say, especially in Europe. And that's a really enjoyable class for the sort of grip and track sizes we have over here. But maybe the only answer really is to actually limit the battery size, because that would force you to slow down and to actually save energy for the full 8 minutes, which is something we didn't really have to do in the last few years. 15 years ago, things were very different, and yeah, I'm sure David can talk a bit about that.
We do realise if we do this, David will win everything again.
Maybe. But the reason I don't like the capacity limit, if the capacity limit is controlled by a magic black box, the reason I don't like that is because you've just taken every single battery manufacturer out of the market. You've just made the market even smaller. So I think it has to be something where maybe the chemistry of the battery we use changes, So it's still in Reed. I can see you wearing an Associated Reedy t-shirt, where it's still in Reedy's interest to produce the best pack for 12 scale possible, to still be the best, and it still gives them something to work to and fight for. Maybe we have to go into LiFi, maybe we have to go into a lower capacity pack that can go flat, so it's lower voltage, lower capacity. But to just put a black box in there, for me, just it destroys a whole marketplace for the industry.
What do you think, Ant?
Yeah, I mean, you either do it the way with the black box, or you risk setting the cars on fire. So LiFi batteries is probably the only way you're going to be able to do it.
Would you like to see that, Alex? Sort of someone that's doing it around the world. Would that make your life easier? Let's say
It will make my life easier in one sense, but it will also make it more difficult, especially now because we're having different rules on different continents. So when I go to the US, we're racing Blinky modified. In Europe, we're racing 6.5. So if we could use the same rule all over the world, that would make my life easier. But I'm also against spec racing for the same reason that David is, that if you make it spec, then the manufacturers are not forced to improve the product anymore. Then they're just going to try to make the product as cheap as possible.
Yeah, and I think that's with any hobby, everybody's trying to spend less on it. I mean, my sport, they've been with golf clubs, that hasn't changed. I mean, they're just reinventing the wheel, if you like, or trying to. And the same with this racing lark. I mean, everyone is just getting faster and faster. And and Donnie, I don't know how many of you guys have listened to episode 4 of the podcast. Shameless plug there. We talk about America and what they're doing and going faster and faster. And his thought, the scale speed is like 800 miles an hour or something. And I think if in F1 the cars can go way faster than they do now, but they'd be crashing. If you just let it have open season, make it go as fast as you like for as long as you like, actually the manufacturers would blow themselves out, wouldn't they? Because in golf, you can only hit the golf ball so far with the same amount of clubhead speed. The golf club is only a certain amount of thickness to make a trampoline effect to make the ball go a long way. So if you want to hit it further, you now need to get in the gym, train harder, and create more clubhead speed. Now with racers, if we reach a point where the car can go down the straight at a scale speed of 1,500 miles an hour, and actually all you do is just fire it into the wall, and you actually go, do you know what? I don't fancy that. I'm going to go to a 4.5 or 6.5 or whatever. Might not that be the way to go? Just go for your life. Make it as powerful as you like. Give it 2S and just let the open season. Why wouldn't that be a way to go, David?
Because you simply can't do it. You simply can't drive them.
But that's the point, though, isn't it? That's the point.
I think, the limit. I mean, you saw at the Worlds. You had product failure, and you had accidents that were absolutely huge, and cars completely destroyed. So you already are at that limit now. You are already there. When you see the best drivers in the world race mod, and you watch the Snowbirds or Cleveland or the New York GP or something, those guys are incredible. But there'll be 3 or 4 of them that get it right. Just 3 or 4. And they'll be gone. They'll be a lap, 2 laps down the road because they've got it so good. For everybody to do that, it's got to a point now where it's just too difficult. Too difficult. So if you want to pull it back a bit, what's the answer? I don't know. Whenever I do it, I just keep coming back that we've got to change the battery chemistry. I read up someone on the thread. I don't get much of the chat on the thread, but someone said 2S. Potentially 2S, LiFi, something.
Yeah, Tim Fry said that. Yeah, 2S and a smaller motor.
You could go 2S with a smaller motor, but the important part will be the capacity needs to be limited on a battery that we can empty. So if it's 2S and it's only 4,000 milliamps, maybe. We will have to change the motors that we use and the gearing and the way we use our brushless systems, but that could potentially be a way of going racing.
We can voltage limit. We can voltage limit the speedos and have them protect the battery. A 1S battery can't reverse charge its mate. Its mate doesn't exist. So why can't we just have the speedo throw away the power at a certain cutoff voltage, and then everybody's safe? They won't destroy their batteries. They'll just run out.
It's not necessarily about them. I agree with you. You can just have a black box in there and you can just turn the battery off. But what you do with that is then you immediately alienate anybody that tries to produce and sell a LiPo pack, because every single LiPo pack will be above the minimum or the maximum we're allowed to use. If you choose a limit of 5,000 milliamp hour, you can pretty much pick any pack from any manufacturer from anywhere in the world and use it. So you've just completely taken that market away from the industry. There's no need for anybody to push the envelope or make better product anymore. Whereas if we reduce the fuel tank, we give it a different chemistry, and then it's in your interest and my interest to go and find the best packs we can get to get an advantage again. That then brings back into racing.
Okay. Well, yeah. I mean, I think this is a topic that could go on for quite some time, and it's not something that we want to maybe consume this feed over. But interesting discussion nonetheless. So let's talk about. I mean, it's something that Ant and I talk about consistently on the podcast about getting better. And I know obviously we've had both of you guys on. Could you give maybe one direction that someone that's new to RC, that a process that they might apply to get their driving up another level? What would be your go-to, Alex, if you could give a tip to people that are new to the class?
I mean, it's cliche to say that you need to practice more, but it's actually true. You need to spend as much time on the track as you possibly can. Try to learn as much as you can from the drivers that are better than you or the drivers that have more experience than you. Don't be afraid to ask questions to the local fast guys. I mean, that's the best way to learn. That's the only way to learn, really. Don't try to go slower. Try to go as fast as you can with mistakes, and eventually you'll learn to drive at that speed and the mistakes will disappear. That's sort of my approach, at least when I was younger.
And what about the other end of the spectrum, David? Someone that is knocking on the door of the big finals of their club, or looking to topple their best driver if they're number 2 or number 3 in their club. What would be your go-to for them to topple them?
Details. It's all in the details. You can look at the guy's car next to you and he's got the same chassis as you, he's got the same battery as you, he's got the same motor as you, but it's all in the detail. Is it geared correctly? Is it timed correctly? Are you charging the LiPo correctly? Are you looking after your product correctly? Is the car straight? Is it true? All those things all make a difference, and it all adds up at the end of the day. So if you can make your equipment help you, make it do it. Learn. Make sure you're studious enough after every meeting to put it back to how it was at the beginning. Make notes of how you set your car up and what you like, and then just make sure you maximize every opportunity you've got.
Have you got any thoughts on that? On the guys, just on the edge of toppling their best driver in their club, if you like?
And ask their team, ask the people they race for. If you're that close, I mean, that's why we're doing this conversation now. That's why we're all up late tonight, doing this live feed. Ask the questions. If there's something specifically that you're not sure of, ask.
What about you, Alex? What do you think on the better driver to get last few tenths out of his ability?
Yeah, exactly. It's a sport where the material is everything. So you need to make sure that your stuff is in perfect shape and it's well taken care of, that you have the right setup on the car. And yeah, we all know how big of a difference it can make when you get the setup right and when you get the right equipment in your car. So yeah, work really hard on your driving, but equally hard on your equipment.
What's been the biggest thing for you, Ant, that's helped you, do you believe, along the way to your driving?
People giving me advice, David, Ollie, knowing, those situations
What
where the
about my
cars.
advice?
Well, yeah, exactly. Knowing there's been situations where I've put the car down and it's just not been any good, and then Ollie will just say, "This is what I've done. Do this," and then suddenly it's magic, and it could be like a 2 mil shim somewhere. So definitely, what David says: lean on the people who you drive for, or who are the fast guys running your chassis, and everyone's always happy to share their experience. I've found.
We've got a question, and we're going to go live to to Tony. What's your question, Tony?
Oh, hello. Hang on a minute. I can sort this camera out. Oh, there you go.
We don't need to necessarily see you, Tony. We just want to hear you. What's your question?
Oh, no, I like seeing myself. Hello, everyone. How to get the best out of your lipos. If people want to know about that, charging, discharging, when to put them in, are they going to be warm or that sort of thing?
Good question. Alex, what do you do?
Well, there's 2 ways to angle that question. How do you get the most performance out of it, or how do you maintain it for the longest? Like, how can you get the most life out of it? Because it's hard.
A bit of both, really.
It's hard to get both. I mean, if you want the best performance, you need to
kill it.
Basically, to try to lower you need to try to lower the internal resistance by discharging it, and basically generating heat in the battery before you charge it, or during the charge. And that's the basic way of making the battery have better performance.
And making it last a long time. What about for the people that want to do that and not necessarily performance biased?
Don't do that to that extent.
Do the opposite.
And make sure that you always charge it if you're not going to use it for a while. So don't store it with too low of a voltage, because that will kill the battery as well.
Any other top tips, David?
Just be careful of the current. As Alex said, we do the discharge to get the internal warm, to stir up the whole pack inside the lipo, so every single ounce of energy in there is available to us. That's why we do the discharge before we charge. You can still do that, just do the current sensibly and charge sensibly, and storage mode is the key. You don't want them going below storage voltage. That really does hurt the lipo quite a lot.
Great. Well, listen, I think it's been going just over an hour now, and it's sort of late in the night. So maybe we'll wrap this up. But I mean, personally, I'd like to keep this maybe as a regular thing, weekly. Doesn't necessarily have to have Alex and David along, but maybe get a few other guys that might want to contribute, because I think it's as we've said, I think it's just a nice thing to do. Lots of faces that we miss seeing at the track, and being part of the community. It's we're a nerdy bunch that love toy car racing. I think it's really important that we keep the love going. So we'll do this again next Thursday, whether Ant wants to come along or not, whether Alex and Dave you want to come along or not. But I'm going to be here, and I'm going to put it out there, and maybe we can discuss some more topics, because there's lots of questions. I think people, once they start to get into the flow of it, of what they maybe want to know, maybe we can evolve it a little bit further. Anything you guys want to say, Dave, Alex, Ant?
No. Yeah. Please get your questions ready. We'll come back next week and we'll answer whatever we can.
Ant, anything?
Thanks everyone for coming along and taking the time. Alex, David, it's appreciated that you've got behind what we're trying to do and helped us out.
Yeah, and we've kind of we're passionate about improving, as we always say on the podcast, and the opportunity of maybe putting together some training days. And Mark Stiles made a point that as sponsored drivers, that's kind of your job, but to help guys at the track. But I think there's a real difference. Speaking from a coach's perspective, I think when someone comes up and says, "Oh, can you stop me doing this?" You know, a quick 30-second conversation is not the same as having Alex Hagberg or David Spashett stand next to me for half an hour, or Mark Stiles stand next to me for half an hour and go this, and be my mentor for 30 minutes with a transaction of some money. For me, if you're looking to improve and get some real good experience, I think that's a very different environment to what a sponsored driver is offering. So I think Ant and I are keen to maybe push that going forwards and maybe get some people along. And I think it'd be a great environment, not just go there racing, but to actually improve your skills at having better experience at race events. I'll stop talking because I'll keep going. Alex, much appreciate your time as ever, and obviously yourself, David and Ant. Thanks a lot.
See you later.
Thank you.
Take care, boys.
Ta-da.
Little bit. Ta-da. Bye.